of Kings, da-da-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle, Way of Kings. We'd finished part 1, remember? And now we're in the Interludes. Interlude 1, Ishik. These interludes, you see, the way this works is, these interludes are just little, you get to see different bits of the world that Brandon just wants to just sort of show you, so that you get to see more of the world than just what is seen through the main character's eyes. I guess so that you get a wider perspective and don't just think that everything centers on them. I don't know why, but he decided to do it, and so here we are with Ishik, a simple man from a simple place. The Pure Lake is a place for fishing and splashing and very little else, and the simple people there who have all these complex superstitions about what different fish can do, they've built their huts into the Pure Lake, right down into it, below the water level, so that they can always, the water runs right through their houses, because to them it's weird anytime they don't have their feet splashing about in the water. They feel like they need to be connected to the Pure Lake. What a great little idea that is. I mean, just straight off, that's a completely convincing idea. In the same way that, like, the sun is an obvious source of life, water, rivers, are an obvious source of life. And absolutely, if you happen to be a primitive tribe who lived in one, well then why wouldn't you want to feel it on your feet at all times? Yes, that makes total sense to me, and I completely buy this. And that's good, because this is the sort of chapter that I've talked about before as being a trope that I find in nearly every fantasy and sci-fi book I read, where at some point we have to go and visit a primitive tribe and see how a primitive tribe lives. And more often than not, it's sort of not really that sci-fi or fantasy a way for a primitive tribe to live. So, you know, you came for fantasy, you came for magic, or you came for science fiction, and what you get is how to build a mud hut. You know, I'm never keen on that bit, but for some reason it just sort of weirdly, inevitably happens in all the fantasy and sci-fi books that I read. I don't know why, I don't know where this comes from. Why do authors do this? Anyway, Brandon has come up with a completely new idea that I haven't seen anywhere before. This idea of them always having to splash around in the river and having it go through absolutely every building that they have so that they can always have their toes in there. I like that, it's really cool. Now, there's not much story to be had here, but what's there is intriguing enough. There are 3 people who this guy, who lives in these huts in this river, has thinks of as being sort of from the outside. They're from a world other than his. And he calls them Grump, Blunt, and Thinker. They claim to have names, but he thinks they're lying about that. And these 3 guys aren't directly antagonistic to him or anything, but you can tell that there's something fishy about them. Hey! For the last 5 months, they've had Ishik asking round everywhere he goes because they're looking for a particular person, and for some reason, they think he might be able to help. But it hasn't helped, he hasn't found him. And that's pretty much it for this interlude. There's not much to say here, so we're going to power through these. There was a couple of notes that I made about stuff that I liked that I just thought was cool world building, such as New Ralik, which is the god of this tribe, right? But you don't say out loud that you worship this god, because that would anger his evil brother, who would unleash evilness if it wasn't for the fact that everyone pretends to worship him, unless they're in a particular sacred temple space or a holy grotto. If you're in a holy grotto, then you're allowed to worship the actual god and be like, don't worry about it, it's you, it's actually you, you're the actual god we're worshipping. The rest of the time they have to pretend to worship the sort of devil equivalent character, because he'll just be cross otherwise. What a great little... I don't think this place ever comes up again in the book. So isn't that an interesting little thing? Like, Brandon's just gone, no, do you know what? I'm going to do some good world building here. Never mind the fact that this is almost irrelevant. And I'm struggling to think how this is actually relevant to the book. The clue might be in who these guys are trying to get Ishik to find. And here's the description. White hair, clever tongue, and arrow-like face. Well, with the second of those, the clever tongue, I'm starting to get an idea who it might be that they're looking for, but I can't remember this character's description, so we'll see how we are when we get there. Ah, yes, and there we are. Confirmed. I was right. When I started this video, I was going from the notes that I made when I first read this chapter, which was, you know, at, like, the time when I was first reading through it. And so I didn't make an adequate note of the fact that the man who they're looking for is, as I suspected, called Hoyd. We will learn more about Hoyd later, but Brandon Sanderson readers are always telling me that I ought to keep an eye out for this Hoyd. So I guess that's a little teaser. Shall I go into this in depth at this point? No, I feel not. If anyone's reading along, then they might not want this talked about, because it's almost a spoiler, and it's kind of not a spoiler. I'm going to leave it for now. We'll talk about it later on. Now we get to Interlude 1-2, Nan Balat. Nan Balat Davar is one of Shallan's brothers, and the picture that this chapter paints of Nan Balat is not a particularly positive one. The first line in the whole chapter is, Nan Balat liked killing things, and we join him pulling the legs off a crab, really sadistically, because it helps him to calm down. Ooh, this is the sort of fella that Karen and Georgia would warn you about. Apparently, this leg-plucking ritual helps to take his mind off the pain that he has in his leg, which was, something happened to it, something bad happened to it. It's a broken leg, and the doctor almost had to amputate it. Which he didn't in the end, but it's still Nan Ballat's always going to have to walk with a cane. So I think we're looking at the birth of a villain here. Here's a guy who walks with a cane and pulls legs off things, and he knows about Shallan's success in the little plan for her to go and try and steal the Fabrial off Jasna, and he's heard about this via Span Reed, which we don't know what that is yet, and we basically get some information about the family here, and it's pretty broken. I don't want to go into details because we're now edging towards the bit of the book where, look, we're this far in now, which isn't very far in terms of the whole book, but it's the point at which I don't want to just tell you the whole story. I want to focus on sort of responses and, talking about the chapter after having read it, because that's what you're supposed to be doing. Do go and get yourself a copy of this book. It's a good one. And then Wickham shows up. They've got news of a pretty big problem. Now, this chapter I found very interesting. I like the Shallan story. It's got a lot of magic jewels in it, and so I was happy to, hear about the backstory that she has here, and it makes me feel like, no, someone like Shallan, she's not nasty enough. She's not perfect, but she's not nasty enough to come from this kind of background. Everything is completely broken here, but she doesn't seem to think of her home life as being nearly as toxic as it appears to be here. I mean, everything is wrong here. We get to hear that Shallan was left alone by her father, and the implication is that she was the only one of them who was. I get the sense it means in a violent way, so that's a bad start. Nan, by the way, appears to mean eldest son, so I guess that's why he's called Nan Ballat. Ashar Jushu Davar is another of their brothers who's driven to vice by their father's temper. Tet Wickham, another brother, is driven to despair by it. And Nan Ballat himself believes himself to be unscathed by his father, but is clearly just completely ruined as a person. I suppose his one saving grace is that he feels bad for having sent Shallan off on this quest, but only in the sense that he feels like a coward. I don't know, I didn't get the sense of this as being a particularly warm character. And while we're here, why don't we learn about a bit of wildlife? We find out about axe hounds, which have 6 legs at the front and 2 at the back, I think, covered in a cross between shell and skin, smooth to the touch, and more pliable than carapace, but harder than skin, and made of interlocking sections. And they've got this angular face and deep black eyes, so axe hound, sort of family dog type thing. Don't really know that much about them, but they look weird. And then we hear about songlings, which is a kind of animal that sings by scraping its shell. That's nice, isn't it? They're fist-sized, they're shaped like a peaked disc. Well, I'm not really sure what that means. Like a peaked... What does peaked mean here? Like a peaked disc, 4 arms reach out from the sides and scrape rhythms along the top. And then 4 squat legs underneath, which usually affix them to rock walls. Oh, that's fun, isn't it? Our final interlude then is 1-3, The Glory of Ignorance. And we're back with Seth's son Villano again. You remember him? The truthless of Shinovar. He's at an inn with his current master, whose name is Took, who shows off to the locals and then steps outside and is promptly murdered by thieves. And the thieves find, upon this man's person, Seth's Oath Stone, which is a clump of rock, and I've written in my notes, about sphere-sized. I think I probably mean about fist-sized, with a few quartz crystals set into it and a rusty vein of iron on one side. I can only picture the sort of balls of ore and jewels that you get in Shovel Knight. When you shovel like a heap that's attached to the wall, I think it lands as a ball, and that's what I can't help imagining as an oath stone. And Seth is obliged to inform these thieves that for as long as they hold his oath stone, they are his master. He must obey any order they give him at all, except to kill himself. We get a few details about him in this chapter. He hasn't called on his shard blade in a very long time. He knows a lot. He's really, really intelligent, and he appears to be sort of biding his time, or to honestly, truly think that he should be a slave. He doesn't have Kaladin's rebellion in him. And this was a really interesting shift for me, to go from thinking of this character as a kind of Assassin's Creed semi-ninja, to thinking of him as something like a little hobbit who would gladly cut his arm up if his master tells him to. It really throws a spanner into the works, and I remember being just fascinated to see where Brandon was taking this. And of course, with his hood down and his big funny eyes out, this guy is suddenly way more anonymous than before, and it kind of makes sense why he would be able to kill a king and get away with it. Apparently, he looks like a child, but speaks like a sort of posh butler or something. He's way, way more capable than anyone ever suspects, but when they start to catch on, that's usually the point at which they stop wanting him as a slave anymore. It's interesting, isn't it? And so, there we go, those are the interludes, and next time we're going to start on part 2, and we are going to meet Dalinar! Ah, Dalinar, can't wait to see you again. Here we go. Join me next time, then, for part 12 of The Way of Kings! Why am I trying to do an outro to this? I'm just like, bye!